Good afternoon. If you're on the East Coast, it's now officially lunchtime for everyone else. Thank you for being here. My name's Adam McElwain, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to today's lunchtime webinar, which is entitled Byte-Size Wisdom, Unveiling 5 Lessons Learned from the MEGABYTE Act. We're happy that you're here. During this session, we will talk about the MEGABYTE Act and how it brought for change to the federal software asset and software license management programs. My goal is to look to the past 7+ years in this space and hopefully glean some actionable insights that will help you all manage your software assets and licensing in a more efficient way. If you don't know our company, SIE Consulting Group, we do pride ourselves in helping federal agencies navigate the SAM and SLM strategy. We have over a decade of experience helping agencies specifically with software assets and software licensing. We invite you to take a look at our website to learn more about us, and we also invite you to follow us on LinkedIn. We do post quite a bit of updates about this space, so please do reach out and find us on LinkedIn if you're using it. Here's me, Adam McElwain. I've been helping the government manage complex programs for more than 20 years. And for the last 7, I've focused almost primarily on software asset and software license management. In fact, my job was available to help develop a program at the General Services Administration called SLMS, SLMS, which stood for the Software License Management. And in 2016, I was brought on to help that program, which was established right before MEGABYTE became law. The purpose of that program was to kickstart federal compliance with MEGABYTE and help agencies start to mature their software license management programs. So the agenda, we have 3 main sections. I'm going to start with an overview on MEGABYTE and talk about the background as well as the requirements of the law. And then the main section that I'll be talking about is the 5 lessons learned from that law. Then we'll open it up to a federal roundtable. I've invited a number of experts, and we're lucky enough to have 2 of them that have graciously accepted the invitation to share their own experiences, as well as provide some real-world education and unique perspectives on SAM and SLM in the federal space. We'll close the section today by talking about next steps, as well as some takeaways, including a preview of new legislation that, if passed and becomes law, would supersede MEGABYTE for agency requirements related to asset and license management. The other thing I'll state here is that our roundtable participants are not official spokespeople for the agencies they've worked for. They volunteered to be here on their own time, and our goals are really just to add some personal and public sector perspective to the conversation. So we're grateful for their time today, as well as their continued dedication to serving the U.S. government with integrity and excellence. All right, before we get into section 1, I look at this slide, I have to tell you, we're trying to be a lunch-themed webinar. It is supposed to be informal. In the old days, we would have hosted this somewhere and actually had lunch available to participants, but we have to do this virtually now, and you'll see our lunch-themed art throughout. Anyway, I need to get into what is MEGABYTE. I've used that acronym a lot. Some people might not be familiar. It does actually stand for something, which is the Making Electronic Government Accountable by Yielding Tangible Efficiencies Act. And it was passed in 2016 and essentially requires agencies to adopt software license management processes. Before the law was passed, there really wasn't much oversight specific to software. Although FITARA did help shift the direction of IT acquisition, it was MEGABYTE that exclusively focused on software licensing. MEGABYTE became law after a key OMB memo was issued called M1612. That was published in the Obama administration of June of 2016. Many of the parts of that memo eventually became codified into MEGABYTE, but the memo does include additional requirements that agencies need to be aware of including the designation of a unique individual person as a software asset manager, the development of a plan called a software management centralization plan, and the use of automation, including tools to collect inventory and entitlement records. There's some other requirements in both the memo and Megabyte, specifically around training and establishing goals and objectives for the software's license management program, considering licensing throughout all life cycle phases to make effective decision making, etc. Let's jump into lesson 1 of our 5-lesson webinar. And lesson 1 is that Megabyte worked. Well, at least for the first few years, which I'll explain here in a minute. But Megabyte Act of 2016 really marked a significant milestone in government software asset management. I've mentioned how Megabyte came after FITARA. FITARA is the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act. So FITARA covers a much broader landscape, including data centers, consolidation, CIO authority, portfolio stat. There's a host of categories that FITARA covered, but until Megabyte came along, there really wasn't any kind of formal federal guidance or direction on software asset and software licensing. So you can see it was successful. In fact, since 2014, when FITARA passed, there's been over $2.1 billion in cost savings reported through initiatives related to FITARA and Megabyte. And we can look at a few additional snapshots of where those cost savings occurred. We have a couple of examples on this slide, including USDA, VA, USAID, and GSA. And it isn't just about cost savings, it's also about efficiency, collaboration, bringing the program together. So I mentioned that Megabyte was successful for the first couple of years, but it's really fallen off the radar in terms of a focus area for many federal agencies. And the question is why? What happened? The first major reason is that Megabyte is no longer tracked on the FITARA scorecard. In fact, it hasn't been tracked for over 3 years. It last showed up on the December 2020 scorecard when every agency covered by the FITARA scorecard had achieved their A grade. So for the last 3+ years, there's been virtually no attention related to Megabyte, even though it stands as the law of the land today. And obviously, the initial success stories that we highlighted are commendable, including substantial savings and effective software asset management practices, but sustaining compliance to the law is really the difficult part and can be a complex challenge that's influenced by a number of factors, things like changes in leadership or evolving priorities, any external market drivers. Those all impact the continuity of compliance. And it's important to recognize that SAM programs is dynamic and agencies need to continuously adapt, even if the Megabyte law is stagnant over the last 7+ years. One other point to note here is that SAMOSA Act, which I'll be talking about towards the end of the presentation, has passed the Senate and was marked up in the House back in July. Right now, it is not law, and there would be implications to agencies to comply with SAMOSA should it become law. But for now, Megabyte is the law and is something that still needs to be followed. Our second lesson is that collaboration is key. I'm going to talk about this one not only by our personal experience working with agencies that are developing SAM programs and trying to comply with Megabyte, but also through our federal forum, where you'll hear firsthand account about the need to collaborate and to include stakeholders from multiple parts of an organization in order to effectively manage SAM. I would say collaboration is probably the most important factor for SAM, especially when it comes to federal organizations, which can be massive, right? Billions of dollars in IT spend spread across numerous programs. in agencies that are often federated, right? Or highly siloed is another way to say that. And the goal of IT is to enhance communications that will help enable the mission. Well, it's the same thing when we're talking about SAM, and the importance of collaboration and communication is necessary. And the best run SAM programs are the ones with the highest collaboration and stakeholder engagement, as well as executive sponsorship. So the ability to work up and down the chain of command follows on that key lesson learned regarding collaboration. OMB and Congress were really smart to mandate that every agency name a software asset manager. It put a person's name and role on the line to account for compliance. And they also ensured that a CIO established a software centralization plan. So right away, these requirements kickstarted the need for collaboration and gave agencies the authority and executive sponsorship requirements needed to make a difference. So SAM and software license management really do require a 360-degree view and coordination across the agency. IT will obviously define its requirements from its users, but acquisition, procurement, security, chief technology offices, and really all IT programs have a stake in how the government buys its software. Starting small can prove to be very valuable. When you look at the OMB memo or the Megabyte language, it talks about capturing 80% of inventory and 80% of spend and bringing vendors under management. When you look at your agency and you see billions spent, thousands of products, potentially hundreds of unique vendors, it's all an enormous amount of data to try and reconcile and prioritize. So one of the things that successful SAM programs have shown is that starting small can really make a difference. And SAM program maturity can grow over time. It could start with a single vendor or the deployment and pilot of a tool in a localized environment. Agencies really should not expect to maximize their ROI on software for all of their spend at once, but by strategically picking the right vendors, this can be done. So this slide shows some very simple, but some pretty decent samples in how federal organizations might organize their SAM program. On the left-hand side, we've taken a snapshot of the Department of Homeland Security, which under Megabyte needs to designate a department level software asset manager. But obviously, the department level is going to rely heavily on the components that support the department, including USCIS and Coast Guard, CBP, FEMA, et cetera. There's many components not listed here, but you can extrapolate that each component would have their own requirements and data inputs for managing and evaluating their software inventory and their entitlements. On the right-hand side, this is a view of a potential sample org chart at an agency level where a software license program manager would have a series of analysts that could focus on different endpoints. For instance, your servers or your laptops, your mainframes. You might also have an application administrator that would be responsible for managing the tool that is used, or tools in some cases. Many agencies rely on multiple tools to collect inventory for and entitlement data. So by no means are these depicted as the only way to organize a SAM or SLM program in the government, but there are two formats that we've seen work and can be adopted to fit your own needs. We're going to jump into lesson 3, and I've talked a little bit about this already, the use of tools. And tools certainly matter, but there is no easy button. That's a very important lesson that we've learned. In fact, if you go to the Megabyte Act, it rightly emphasizes the need for agencies to adopt tools for automating, tracking, analyzing, and managing software license. Many agencies are led to believe that a tool will magically fix their SAM problems and fail or neglect to invest in the right people and process. Just remember, it's the combination of the right tools and processes and people that create a robust SAM framework. For the most part, software salespeople, and especially the good ones, will convince the most skeptical buyer that their tool can and will make your life easier. It's actually one of the reasons why the government buys so much software. It is so much easier to buy software than it is to install it, to configure it, and to effectively use it. And this is true too for the people that are selling and the companies that are selling SAM and SLM tools. Some of those are great. And when I say those, I'm talking about the tools. What I wanted to make sure people understood about this lesson is that there is no easy button, and tools will work if they're properly configured and managed by the right people. And they can offer a streamlined approach to managing software licenses. They can be highly proficient, they can help you automate processes, but it's certainly not an easy button and should be considered a multi-year effort once you already understand your environment and can build some process and governance around effective SAM. So the first challenge is the organization. It's very easy to buy a tool, but installing it and configuring it, another challenge, especially in the federal government, when you think about things like FedRAMP and 508 compliance and the host of security, bureaucracy, all rightly so to keep the environment safe. But we've seen organizations buy SAM tools and take years, literally years to install them because of those roadblocks. So make sure you know what integration and configuration is going to require before you buy it so that you're ready to take advantage of those tools as soon as you own them. And obviously things like firewalls or organizational fiefdoms, competing resources. Another big one we've seen is limited authority to discover data. All of those things can impede the success of your SAM tool. In the middle, we have vendor disparities. And what this means is that not all SAM and SLM tools are great tools for every vendor you manage. Tool compatibility is a real challenge. The example I'll use is if I had my own Atom SAM tool and it happened to be really good at managing IBM, but maybe not so good at managing Oracle, but we could probably get some Oracle value out of it. I might not tell you all the pitfalls of my tool in regards to vendor disparities, and it would be up to you to discover that on your own, or ideally working with someone that's been there before and knows which tools work for which vendors before you go out and procure them. Regardless, even the best tool is going to require creative subject matter expert input and problem solving to produce your desired results. The last challenge we see on this slide is data access challenge. It's important to know that discovery of inventory is only one half of the equation. You have to load that data with contract and entitlement information unique to your organization. So even if you were able to plug in the perfect tool and discover everything in use on your network today, you would still need to know how you're licensed and how those license entitlements allow for evaluation of compliance and usage according to the terms of that contract. And that cannot happen until the contract data is properly loaded and configured. And that's something that's often downplayed during the sales cycle of a SAM tool, is just how much manual effort some of that upfront work can be. This is a simplified view of the necessary data inputs for proper SAM and SLM. And really, it's irrelevant whether you have a dedicated tool or not to manage this stuff. It's going to come down to getting the right data, which at its foundation includes both entitlements and inventories. So our goal as a company and for the agencies we work for is to help you strike the perfect balance between your entitlement and inventory status for every vendor that you own, or certainly the most important and most valuable vendors. If we can eliminate vendors from your spend portfolio, even better. Obviously, just capturing and validating the required data is really just the start. It's ultimately about utilizing the information strategically to succeed with your SAM objectives. Okay, so we're 3/5 of the way through our lessons here. I talked about how tools matter, but there's no easy button. Well, what we find really matters more is the management approach and the governance of your program. Effective SAM requires a strategic approach and the right expertise along the way. You can think of this scenario of trying to build a house, which you wouldn't start without a plan, right? And when that right time came, you would hire plumbers and electricians and carpenters, the experts that you needed to get the job done correctly. It's really the same thing with building SAM success. You need to have a well thought out management approach, a plan, the right governance, and the right expertise along the way. And we want people to understand that effective SAM can start with 4 repeatable steps that anyone can manage or can at least try to manage for all of the software that an agency owns. Step 1 is picking the right vendor or vendors. Up at the top, we see, top 25 vendors, but I've mentioned this can start with really just one. And then we say vendor or publisher onboarding. And what that really means is bringing that vendor under management, getting to know everything about the publisher and how your organization uses it, develop effective license positions, which essentially answers how much do you own, how much are you using. Look at that for all the products that vendor includes. Also, you need to know your pricing, your terms and conditions, key contract dates like renewal and expiration, and any terms that expire in what are sometimes called trial periods or base year terms and conditions. The third step is steady state or maintenance. Essentially, when you bring a publisher on board and under management, you've shown a one-time effective license position or a one-time snapshot for how that vendor is deployed and how the organization is entitled to use it. But you need to maintain that. And that's what happens during the third phase of steady state, which means refreshing data for inventory changes or contract changes, or really both. All of this leads to the fourth step, which is taking action, using the information for your buying decisions, dropping products you don't use, upgrading usage rights when needed, paying for products in use without entitlement, avoiding getting audited by the vendor. That's how you optimize your portfolio, by making sound business decisions based on the needs of the program and also the risk mitigation strategies for that program to avoid costly audits. Obviously, that was a highly simplistic view of a SAM program. There are other considerations. The changing landscape really means that with the advent of cloud, with licensing terms that can change at whim or change when products are upgraded, it's hard to keep on top of this. And one way to put it is that SAM or SLM is a practice. It's never perfected, but rather the organization should seek continuous improvement. The other major challenge is that this licensing is highly complex. The biggest vendors have ways that they can get more money out of you, and those include complex licensing agreements, usage ratios, and different licensing metrics that you need a foundational understanding of the arithmetic that went into the agreements, and you need the proper tools and data to manage your licensing is complicated. And if you're not familiar with the products, that's where the use of SMEs can help you. And obviously cloud licensing, as agencies are moving their data centers to the cloud or offloading software into SaaS models, there's a risk of double paying for things or for trying to make products cloud ready without the proper entitlements. And that can and often does complicate your SAM strategy. So the last lesson, number 5 here, we say is to keep SAM separate. We strongly believe that software asset management and software license management belongs as an independent function within your agency. And sometimes this isn't always feasible, especially for small agencies. However, one reason we see agencies getting into trouble, either by overbuying or underbuying, both of which can lead to costly mistakes, is that software asset and software license management is often included as a subtask buried in a large integration contract. And when you have that situation, you often get a fox watching the henhouse scenario where the large program integrator, part of their task, whether it's on the 12th or 20th page of the PWS, does include software asset management and software license management, but that's not their primary function. Their primary function is to keep the system or the program running, right? Well, we advocate for a separate or independent SAM, an internal auditor almost, trusting but verifying that the programs are properly licensed and not exposing the agency to audit risk or to major cost excess and waste by buying more software than is needed. The third bullet is important to know. Not all agencies can carve out an independent SAM program, especially if they're small, but there are some unique opportunities for small agencies to tap into independence. But I think for now, we can move on to section 2, which is the roundtable, and I'll introduce our 2 participants. Our first is Miss Shirley Bowie-Dean. Shirley is a senior IT program advisor for the Department of Commerce within the Office of Chief Information Officer. She's a recipient of the OCIO Bronze Medal, which is the second highest form of recognition awarded to individuals who have exhibited extraordinary efforts in the pursuit of DOC's mission for her work with the DOC Enterprise Software Asset Management Team. She's also the recipient of a Commerce Gold Award for Outstanding Customer Service, which is the highest award you can receive from the Secretary of Commerce. She has over 30 years of experience. She previously served as both the FITARA DOC director as well as a DOC software asset manager. She worked for GSA as a transformation director, managing a $30 million portfolio, which included analytics as a service, deputy CIO for the Minority Business Development Agency.
Hi, Adam, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction.
Thank you for being here, Shirley. Before I ask you the first question of the roundtable, I want to also introduce our second guest, Dr. Prentice Norman. Dr. Norman is a senior cyber and IT leader. He's a military veteran with more than 25 years of experience leading large IT business programs and diverse teams strategically within the C-suite. He's an innovator of new technology, and he is a former presidential fellow, certified in several key fields. Previously, Dr. Norman was the director of cybersecurity for the USCIS and was also a software asset manager for USCIS. Currently, Dr. Prentice Norman is the Director of Cybersecurity at VMD Corporation, leading its multi-million-dollar cybersecurity practice across DoD and civilian agencies. Prentice, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon.
Well, thank you both, Shirley and Prentice, for being here. I want to start with a first question to Shirley. Shirley, as you were listening, and I know you've read some of the slides ahead of time, but talk about your experience at Department of Commerce when you were brought on, starting with just the success of MEGABYTE on the early days at DOC.
Yeah, it was a journey. It was a tall order. Commerce, they published a software license management policy. And as a part of that policy, it was to put together a working group because there wouldn't be any success if you didn't collaborate across all bureaus. We're a federated organization, 13 bureaus, including the Office of Inspector General. And so it would take that big village to come together, so to speak, and to strategize. Our initial requirements were satisfying some GAO recommendations that came out regarding software license management. And then after that, we hit the ground running, had a big kickoff. And so that kind of started it. The other thing I wanted to mention for this particular question was there weren't many folks that were actually holding the title of software license managers at agencies. So that was also a challenge too, because there were people that understood what it meant, but they weren't doing that in their daily roles. So we had to also kind of help communicate and collaborate and do things to make sure that people were comfortable with the law and understanding it, interpreting it, and knowing what we had. We had tall shoes to fill to be able to get that done.
Yeah, great comments, Shirley. Thank you. Prentice, want to bring you in here as well. I know you were at the component level with CIS, but what impact did you see coming from DHS headquarters or maybe with the other components? I know CIS was a bit of a pioneer when it came to SAM, but maybe that turned into some leadership opportunities that you could help collaborate across DHS and maybe talk about how Megabyte might have been an initiative for you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there were a lot of leadership opportunities per your point, but I mean, my primary focus was to Shirley's point, get everybody educated on, mandates, laws, things of that nature, and then kind of take more of a proactive and agile approach to figuring out how to implement the program, how to buy the software, how to get some governance in place. And so really what I did was we started small, right? So to your point, we looked at the equation. How do we balance the equation? And I made the business case from a security perspective, right? Because when you think about it, if you are not doing that basic cyber hygiene, then everything else after that usually sucks. So you need to understand, from a software asset management standpoint, what your organization is doing, so you can tie it to the your cybersecurity strategy in terms of vulnerability management and things of that nature. So that's how I started the conversation with my CIO, the DHS CIO, and then basically, you were, part of that larger working group where we were working with all the other components, talking through use cases, talking through tools, technology, people, process, and things of that nature.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Getting back to the second lesson being collaboration as key. Shirley, I want to turn it back to you. Can you share your process and really the success of developing the eSAM? For those that aren't familiar, Department of Commerce had a working group, and Shirley, you can probably describe it better, but at one point, I think you had more than 70 members and were meeting monthly or more frequently, and how just having people get together and talk about this stuff really made an impact for the department.
Yeah, it started out kind of small with maybe the working group started out kind of small with maybe one or two people being represented from each working group. And as we really started looking at some of the challenges, like maybe there were folks that didn't understand the purpose and didn't understand what was going on. I think for me, it was, how do we get this resonation, energizing of the effort to get people, because it's not just saying, hey, it's a law. It's not just saying it's an OMB memo. It is, well, what are we doing with it? How are we accomplishing all this? And so I don't want to embarrass him because I see him on the line, but so as I was doing some research about Megabyte and I was just Googling, and I happened to stumble across several articles that were published about Dr. Daryl Smith. Sorry, I'm calling you out. And I remember mentioning it to Adam because when I read the article, I said, oh my God, he kind of spearheaded their SAM program, and he ended up saving NASA, I think it was over $100 million. And I said, I would love to meet him, learn from him. And so, Adam, you connected me with him. We brought him in within a couple of months of putting the working group together. And that was the catalyst. That really, really got us going, because you had somebody that demonstrated that it can be done. If we put our heads together, we could actually save taxpayer dollars. And so I'm going to pause. I don't know, Dr. Smith, if you wanted to chime in, but I'm telling you that really, once we got him in and he sort of gave us an overview of what he went through, all of his lessons learned, and he taught us some valuable it taught us some valuable information about how he navigated through his department. Then it made it a lot easier for us. We didn't have to convince anybody anymore. People were then joining because they wanted to be a part of this effort. And then we grew to, like you said, over 70 people were participating on a biweekly and monthly basis.
Great. Thank you, Shirley. And yeah, I'm glad Dr. Smith was able to join us. Certainly his successes did help pave the way for so many others. Prentice, I want to turn it back to you when you were talking about the business case, right? And I don't remember the exact scenario, but essentially you were able to prove value from both a cyber and a financial perspective using one vendor, I believe. And then you were asked to scale it. And you said, okay, well, I need a team and a tool. And I don't know who the team is or what that tool is yet, but as you started to put that work into your business case, can you talk about how you balance the people and the tools and maybe some of the things that you discovered about using tools within the government, specifically around SAM and license management, and how they were able to speed things up, but they didn't come without their own costs or challenges?
Yeah, sure, man. I gotta take notes. You gave me a couple different balls there, buddy, but I got you, Adam. No worries. So yeah, no, my approach was iterations, right? So I come from a software background, so that's kind of how I solve problems. But to your point, we looked at Oracle, VMware, and a couple of our bigger licenses, if you will, or small. We did a couple of big ones and a couple of large ones. So Microsoft, Oracle, VMware, like IBM. Don't remember some of the smaller ones, but we basically did an analysis, brought in a group to do analysis to look at where things were deployed and put together a legitimate list of where it is, what the software is, the versioning, all of those things. Took that information to my leadership and demonstrated to them, one, okay, this is an approach and an effective way to kind of get to the end game, if you will. And then also, two, to demonstrate the value behind it. Because what we did was identify, several over deployments, we'll say, and several opportunities for cost avoidance. And so again, I took that, put that business case together around IBM, Oracle, and some of those areas, and use those. We eventually used those funds to actually pay for the SAM program in terms of people and technology.
Great. Yeah. And obviously, I think you show another path forward that it can start small and grow. Can you talk about those early days when the program was getting off the ground, or at least trying to scale, and the use of tools, and how maybe what your expectations versus reality were in terms of how effective they helped you?
Well, I mean, everybody is probably is familiar with Excel. So like that's where we started at, right? Right. Word documents, Excel. And then, there we, wrote a couple of scripts, not to go too far into nerd land, but to actually start to pull that data together. But basically, we started off in Excel. And once, we showed leadership, hey, look at this big Excel spreadsheet. Wouldn't it be really nice if we could give you a dashboard that showed you where things are, and then start to tie some of that data together so that we not only can avoid costs in terms of licensing when we talk to vendors, right? So now it's given us a position of authority almost, because we know what's deployed versus what was traditionally happening. They would come in and say, hey, Prentice, you owe us, $3 million. We know you guys are deployed here. And it's like, what? Wait a minute, hold up. So once we were able to demonstrate put that list, that used Excel to show where things were, versioning, things of that nature. And then even we started to tie it to the architecture as well. And like I said, that security piece, that kind of made it very clear for leadership to understand not only the value behind it, but like the other things, the other benefits or force multipliers, if you will, from actually going down that path. So Excel. And then from there, that's when I started looking at software asset management tools, right? Hardware asset management tools. And I mean, it's typical in the federal government. You got to do your analysis of alternatives, market research, fill out a lot of paperwork per se. And we went down that path. And luckily at that point, like I had a pretty decent sized budget for new spend and maintenance. So we were able to do a lot of coordination around that and, talk to vendors, look at capabilities, decompose things. Oh, to your point, our SCCM tool, don't want to call anybody out, but I'm gonna have to for this conversation, does really good for Microsoft and all its products, but not so well for Oracle because they had a unique licensing model, right? And not so well for IBM because they had specific terms and usage agreements where you had to use their tool if you deployed IBM products. So through that as well, doing that, small iterations and looking at different parts or pieces of software, we kind of put together a good business case for a tool as well.
Great. Thank you, Prentice. I want to bring Shirley back in here, and we're going to move on to the last section. But before we do, we had our fifth lesson about keeping SAM separate and really having that trust but verify or independent stakeholder without any concerns. Shirley, can you talk a little bit about how ESAM and not only ESAM, but in your partnership with the Enterprise Services for Acquisition did provide that oversight?
Yep. So the Office of Compliance and Oversight, which we call OCO, was actually stood up by myself, and we brought in FITARA, fell in line with that division. I was a division director. As well as the Commerce Information Technology Review Board, our CIPIC, all of that was under there. So we had really direct insight into how we managed our investments and, all of the governance that went around. So we knew upfront what bureaus were going to be purchasing, what their project efforts were. So that was instrumental in us keeping that separate, so to speak, as a separate entity to manage that. And we also created a lot of information sharing, newsletters, meetings, and that type of thing. And I, of course, I retired from that role, but that was definitely critical. That was a big decision made by my executive sponsor, which was Terry Ware, Deputy CIO for Commerce, in putting that division together. That was something else that I stood up from scratch and made it work for what we had to do. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you so much, Shirley. And I know we're near the end of our time, so I'm gonna pause the roundtable and move on. I want to talk about what's next in this landscape. I mentioned at the top of the call, SAMOSA. SAMOSA stands for Strengthening Agency Management and Oversight of Software Assets Act. And this initiative, it will be comprehensive. Essentially, it will supersede MEGABYTE should it pass. It has passed in the Senate. I think it's stalled in the House currently. It's something to be aware of for federal software asset managers. We'll talk a little bit more about what it requires. Here's a picture of the bill and a link if you want to see it. There are really three main requirements for SAMOSA. The first is that the agency conduct an assessment of entitlement and inventory integrity. What that really means is a gap assessment or a maturity assessment. How well can the agency collect and manage its inventory and its entitlements? How complete is that data? And based on the results of that, there are corrective action requirements that would come out of the assessment, but requirement 2 is really pushing towards enterprise licensing positions. In other words, getting away from the one-off purchasing for the most common software and using the buying power of the department or the agency and ultimately the government as a whole to drive down pricing, increase the favorability of terms and conditions, and really try to wrestle some of the control back from software vendors to give to the public service sectors that require it. Please keep an eye out for Samosa. We'll be posting on LinkedIn and notifying people if and when it does become law. We have a separate training in the hopper should it become law to help walk through all of the details and how agencies need to prepare. If you're interested in preparing today before it becomes law, please reach out and let us know. We can help you. Here's my contact information, and thank you all joining. Thank you, Prentice. Thank you, Shirley. And I want to thank my team, Latoya, Lori, Emily, and Christina for helping me put today's presentation together. We're all really glad that you joined us.